Hi, this is Alina, and you're listening to Your PharmD Bestie. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Your PharmD Bestie. My name is Alina. I am the host of this podcast, and I have another guest here today. Her name is Sofia. She's a co-resident of mine, actually, at our current institution. I'll have her introduce herself shortly, but as a brief background of what this episode will be about, we will be diving a little bit deeper into some maybe vulnerable topics and what it's really like to be navigating a fast-paced, intense, emotionally demanding job. Well, residency, I still count that as a job. Um, but while navigating that and still taking care of yourself. So with that, I'll pass it on to Sophia for her to introduce herself. You can give maybe like where you're from, pharmacy school, and just talk a little bit about how the transition has felt so far for.
Sounds good. Well, hello everyone. As Alina mentioned, my name is Sofia. I am a first year pharmacy resident, acute care resident, and I'm originally from South Florida, but I made the move for residency all the way to California. And I went to school in South Florida, grew up there, pharmacy school, all of it. So I went to Southeastern Pharmacy School. For those of you that are familiar with the area, go Sharks, fins up. And yeah, I really want to kind of like get into the weeds of this discussion. I think it's really important to talk about. I feel like school definitely prepares you for the next transition, whether that be residency, fellowship, or you immediately go into the workforce and you start working. But I think that the transition is a little bit more difficult than I anticipated, at least for me personally. And I think that that has been a shared experience amongst my peers when we've spoken about the transition from going from student to resident or learner to employee, I guess, in a sense. But yeah, I'm excited to answer any questions and kind of get more into it.
Yeah, we can start off with, I know you mentioned you made a huge move from basically across the country. So I'm sure that in itself was already like a big adjustment for you to make. But was there anything particular about that from coming a whole new place or going to a whole new place with maybe like not really knowing people here yet, not really having as much of like a reliant or supportive system um here compared to like back home. How was that for you? What were some aspects that maybe you just found extra challenging, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, that was definitely a challenge all on its own. I have all my friends and family in South Florida, and I think that throughout pharmacy school and just in general, they've been a great support system for me always. So the idea of being so far away from them was definitely scary and nerve-wracking, but I made a decision to apply to out-of-state programs because I wanted to kind of expand my horizons and really gain more perspective into how pharmacy is practiced elsewhere. That's something that was really encouraged from our faculty and our professors in school. A lot of them did do residency out of state, and they do recommend if you are able to and you are willing to kind of have those experiences and get that exposure. And that's the reason why I even looked to go out of state to begin with. And I think that I really focus on like larger academic medical centers, wanting to go to a state with pharmacies a little bit more progressive and more pharmacy forward, let's say. Um, the legislature is different, so the ability of our practice is, I guess, a little bit more diverse here compared to South Florida. So that's something that I really wanted to experience. So knowing all of that, I kind of prepared myself for this transition, saying to myself, this is only a year or maybe two if I decide to do PGY2. And what better time or what better opportunity to take to have this experience of like going away for the first time than to complete this mission of continuing to learn and I guess it kind of felt safe to have this like specific timeline of a year or two. And if by the end of that, I'm ready to go back home, I can. So that's how I decided to go out of state to begin with. And then the transition has been I would say challenging, because this is my first time personally being completely on my own and being so far away from friends and family, especially having a time difference. I feel like oftentimes during the first, couple of days or couple of weeks, I would try to call my friends or call my parents to kind of, talk about my day or vent, and your days are kind of interrupted, or um you're like running into different times. Everyone's busy because I'm just getting out of work, but they're like having dinner and getting ready for bed. So that was an adjustment on its own. um and I would say that it definitely made me um rely a lot on my co-residents and really forced me to kind of like come out of my comfort zone and form those friendships and form those relationships. I think we're lucky that we're in a program that we have so many co-residents, so it's great because you have built-in support group. But coming in as an outsider, I guess, it took a little extra work for me to like form those friendships and like form those relationships. So I think that that's something that I struggled with in the beginning, but it only forced me to kind of come out of my comfort zone and like push myself for that. And it also really taught me to be a little bit more intentional with my relationships back home. Sometimes, you take people for granted, unfortunately, because they're right there. So it definitely made me a little bit more cognizant of like making the phone calls, having those FaceTime dates, having those conversations, not just to vent about, about my day, but ask how they're doing. And um, it was a very like reflective experience, and still working on it. So it's been a work in progress.
I definitely feel that, like, even though I am from California, I think just the fact that after pharmacy school, like, you move really a lot of the friends at that time period. And so for I have a hard time sometimes keeping up with what they're doing and also making the time to maintain these relationships. And so I think it's great that you talk about intentional about things that you do and the time that you create for these people, because it does mean a lot. It helps you stay connected while also allowing you to a new community here as well. So definitely agree, like you aren't alone. So I'm also kind of feel like I'm building from scratch this year as so I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, of course. It's definitely a transition, but I think 6 months in, I can say that we're doing a good job.
That's true. I think we take it day by day and then like, wow, we're like halfway through our first year of residency and I'm sure like have developed relationships that like mean a lot to us in their own way too. With that though, I guess kind of switch it to maybe a positive aspect. Like what has surprised you most about residency, like coming in?
I think what has surprised me most is, um, hmm, I would say that I expected time management to be difficult, um, but I also have found that there is a lot of support offered, and I think that this can be very program specific, and I think that this is something that's really important to think about when you're applying to programs or when you're interviewing. And this is like always a great question to ask: is like, how does this program support residents? Um, and something that like happily surprised me is that I think that that is something that is really valued at our program. We are encouraged to use our PTO, to take time off. We are learners, but we are also, um, like you mentioned earlier, employees, I guess, in a sense. So there is a little bit more autonomy with our time. We still have to meet specific requirements for our rotations, of course, and we have responsibilities that we have to adhere to. But I think that there is a little bit more freedom what I felt I had in pharmacy school. Um, and that's something that I appreciate. I also appreciate that preceptors are really encouraging of that. And they themselves really value like work life balance, or just, having like a healthy work life overall. Taking your breaks, taking your lunch breaks, taking a moment to go outside and like go for a walk. I've had preceptors that, are like, hey, it's a really nice day outside. Do you want to pre-round outside under the sun for a little bit? And that's something that it seems like a really small, like, act, but to me, it makes a difference because you're not, like, confined to 4 walls all the time, and you have people around you that make it seem like that it is okay to take those breaks and to do these things, and it is okay, but sometimes I think we get really in our heads about, like, performing at a certain level, and we forget, so having those reminders is really nice from, like, our preceptors or our supervisors because it kind of gives us like the permission in a way to really like prioritize our well-being. And I think that there are like programs, at least in our facility, where like we have our wellness committee and there are different events planned throughout the month, and I think it's really important to like take advantage of those things, and everyone seems to be like very enthusiastic about it, so that definitely helps. So that's something that I would say surprised me about residency in a positive way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing about that. I'm sure there are also things maybe that surprised you about residency, which we could talk about as reframed as like maybe which we knew coming in. But I think continuing to focus on that, like things that surprised you in a positive way, like I also felt that too coming in, where I think it's a little bit different because I was here as a student and I had an idea of like what that looked like as a student, but then coming in as like an employee and kind of being treated more as like an adult was a little bit of adjustment. And I remember starting off thinking like, oh, there's so many rules, so many things that as time has passed and I've met more people at the institution, especially like preceptors, like very they're very much like advocate for you to leave when it's time to leave, and like do those things to keep yourself sane and like to just take care of yourself, keep your mental health well. So I really appreciate you sharing about that. In that aspect, do you feel like having people, especially at work around you, kind of promoting ideals has helped you maybe formulate a routine?
Yeah, definitely. I think that especially when I first started off, like coming fresh into residency, my only reference was being a student, like an API student, and the amount of like hours that you put into your rotations. And, you want to show up early and you want to leave the latest to show that you're working really hard. You want to get those letters of recommendation, right? But now that we're here and we've made it, and I see how preceptors like kind of organize their day, it definitely has given me a better reference point as to how I should organize myself as well. Um, I think something to note is that our preceptors are, of course, there to teach us, but they also have their own like jobs and responsibilities, and their own like committees that they're a part of, and all these other things that they participate in. So kind of seeing how they juggle everything and how they manage their days definitely helps me as well. Uh, I can think of, just like the way that you work up patients and you like time management, right? So some rotations maybe I would come in just a little bit earlier just to make sure that I had everything done by a certain time so that you can leave on time in the afternoon. Um, I think it really helps to, like I said earlier, have I guess someone like emulate these things to make it okay in a way. I hate saying like to give you like permission to do these things because, like taking a lunch break should be a thing, like a standard, right? But sometimes we like tend to like work through lunch or we want to like eat at our desk and get through work. But I think that when your preceptors remind you like hey, no, like take a break. We'll like come back to this. I think that that really makes it okay for you and it just reprograms that thought process.
Yeah, absolutely. What other ways have you practiced, I guess, better self-care and implementing um, better routines, daily routines to kind of like help you keep going, especially like when you might be like having a harder week, because we definitely have those during residency.
Yeah, something that's been huge for me is that I do live alone here and I don't have a lot of help. Um, and that's something that I kind of took for granted back home because I had like my family around me for help with anything and everything, and I have my significant other. So one example is I brought my dogs with me. And I know that I need to walk them in the morning before I go to rotation. I need to come back and like walk them and feed them in the afternoon. And I kind of like have to structure my day around like taking care of them. And as silly as that sounds, that's really helped to structure like my day because I have these other responsibilities that I need to meet. And I can't just rely on like a family member to like help me walk them or to cook dinner that night or like to do laundry. So I think that being like on my own has really allowed me to create a good structure for myself throughout the day because there are not just work related responsibilities that I need to meet, but there's also like the adult life regular responsibilities that you need to take care of. Um, so it's really forced me to kind of plan out my days and plan out, like I know that you like to do like block scheduling. I think I've seen you do like where you like block off specific chunks of time for things. And I'm not as disciplined as you are, but I've learned to kind of do that for myself as well. Because if I don't, then things don't get done, and that's not good. I've had to like really be more intentional about the time that it takes me to do things, not procrastinating, which, I still do. I mean, I'm not perfect, but really like forcing myself to like, okay, we need to get this done because there's no one around to help. There, like, you have to take care of this on your own. And there's a lot of responsibilities and a lot of different demands that come at you from like multiple angles during residency. So I think that really staying on track and learning to prioritize has been a big change for me. Um Oftentimes the way that I would approach certain things would be maybe to get like the easier stuff out of the way first, leave the harder things for last. And I've learned that that does not work anymore. You have to prioritize things in terms of like, when is this due? And what is like the optimal, like best way to optimize your time to get this done? Um, so yeah, I think I'm rambling now, but
No, no, no. I think you bring up like a lot of great points. Some of these are tips that like I've definitely heard from podcasts and like people who have with these like structured ways of going up day, and it helps keep them on track. It helps them um accomplish what they need to get done. So I think those are really important. The prioritization, I think Alfred always talks about it,
Mhm.
like learning what to prioritize first, and like kind of looking at what's on your calendar and figuring out like, is this actually like aligned with my goals? If it's not, like, is it necessary? Can I just take it out completely? Like, I think those are all very valid, and I think I'm hearing a lot of like it seems like you've had to like develop a lot of systems, right, coming into residency to help you like get through things. But I'm also interested in kind of hearing from thoughts on you mentioned like no one is perfect. And so obviously like we all have our days where like things kind of fall through the cracks. How do you how do you self-talk to give yourself grace in those moments? I think more often than not, and I might be like a um accidental like promoter of this because I do like really abide to these structured time blocks and whatnot that I set, but I struggle a lot with giving myself grace when things fall through the crack. So I feel like that's something that a lot of people can really resonate with and take something really good out of it, um, from someone who is able to practice that really well. And for me personally, to me, but I look at you and I get a lot of like emotional maturity and a lot of empathy and someone who's like very understanding. And so I feel like that's why I asked you to come on to talk about this because I feel like be someone that I would want to hear from, like a big sister, kind of.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad that that's what I exude. I think my internal dialogue is kind of crazy. I talk to myself way too much inside my head from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. I don't shut up. And it can be overwhelming. So I literally tell myself sometimes, like, shut up, like, relax. But definitely, I think that I've struggled. I think we all, to some extent, struggle with that. I definitely have, and I still do. Um, but one of the things that I've always kind of gone back and forth about is like the amount of tasks that I assign to myself and whether that's realistic or not. And I think that that sometimes can lead to some like negative self-talk and internal dialogue because I make all these like to-do lists and I'm very like overzealous with what I want to accomplish and maybe I'm not being as realistic with what I can actually get done in the day. And then of course that kind of leads me to feel like, oh my gosh, you failed to complete your to-do list, like you are so undisciplined, you can't stay on track, what's wrong with you? Like all these things. And I have to like really make a conscious effort to not fall into the pit of like this self deprecating talk because that doesn't resolve anything. Aside from the fact that it's like not productive, that's not something that you want to like be hearing inside your head at all times. So I think it has been um a work in progress for me to kind of like change the narrative and be a little easier on myself. And I think that that also comes with the realization that what we're doing is hard. And a lot of the times I find myself like comparing myself to others, whether that be like my co residents or even like my peers from pharmacy school that are in either like much tougher programs or maybe they're just having a different experience altogether. And sometimes you can fall into the trap of thinking like, if so and so can do it and they do it so effortlessly, like, why can't I? But we don't actually know what's going on inside their head, and we don't actually know and see what happens in the day to day, you know? I think it's just really important, like you said, to give yourself grace, and it's much easier said than done. But I think something that helps me is like putting emotions aside and like being realistic about okay, this is all I need to accomplish. It's not doable to do it all in one day. I'm only human. It's okay. And going back to the prioritization, um, it's okay if I didn't finish my grand rounds presentation in December when it's due in April. Like being realistic about timelines also. Um, I think really helps to like put things into perspective because sometimes we want to like have everything done and everything perfect before it's even due. And there are so many, like I mentioned earlier, responsibilities and things coming at you from all different angles. I think it's unrealistic to expect that you're going to be on top of everything at all times. And going back to also what I said earlier about kind of like emulating our preceptors and learning from their like productive habits and the way that they prioritize work-life balance, I've also seen them like delegate things to maybe next week or a different timeline or like reevaluate how much time and effort needs to be put into a project. And I guess seeing someone that's like your superior do that again kind of like gives you the permission to feel like it's okay to do this as well. Um, I think that this is something that everyone struggles no matter like what point in your career you're at or in your training, especially when you are like in healthcare and things are always changing. You have to constantly be learning. Um, or when you're like climbing up the professional ladder, you want to like take on all these projects and like do all these things. But I think that really, really like being realistic with yourself and thinking about how certain projects align with your ultimate goals, um, can kind of help to put things into perspective and like remind yourself that it's okay if you're falling behind on something or if you maybe didn't accomplish a certain thing because it will get done. And that's something that I always tell myself. It might not get done right away, but it will get done. Um, so it's definitely something that I think I continue to work on, and I think we'll all continue to work on it because it's only human that we set these expectations for ourselves, and then we might feel a little disappointed when we don't meet them. But it's also important to know that you've gotten this far. You know, there are so many things that you have accomplished, and like reminding yourself of this. When I start to get really overwhelmed with big projects and I think about, oh my gosh, when am I going to get this done? How am I going to do this? I just remind myself of everything else that I've already accomplished. And I say, okay, well, it'll get done, baby steps, one step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I have a housemate who I feel like this has been happening like every week lately, but there was one time in the past where I told her, like, you don't give yourself enough credit for everything accomplished so far. But I kind of fell into that trap the last couple of weeks where I would like come home every day and I'll be like, I don't think I'm doing enough. I like didn't get to this thing that I wanted to do today. And she'll like come back at me and be like, you told me this like many, many, many months ago, but I need you to look at a mirror and tell yourself this too, that like you've done so much already, you've accomplished so much, so there's no reason for you to feel that you aren't able to get to like where you need to be just because one day fell off or like one assignment um fell through the cracks. So I think that's definitely something that I try to practice like every day too to remind myself as well. So I appreciate you sharing about.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to put into practice, but something else that I just remembered that I like to do is I play this game where it's like the worst case scenario game, and then like, then what? I ask myself. So let's say that I didn't get to accomplish something that day, and I say, okay, then what? Like, then what happens? What's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is that it rolls over maybe into the next day. As long as I think that you're meeting your deadlines or you're communicating with your mentors, with your preceptors of where you're at, and you are still able to kind of like meet your responsibilities and your assignments, um, it'll get done. And it's okay if maybe you didn't accomplish everything that you wanted to in that day or it didn't get done in a specific way or order. Um, I think playing the worst case scenario has helped me a lot because it's made me realize that sometimes things seem worse than they really are. So nobody's going to fire you or like kick you out of residency just because you didn't complete all your to-do lists. But you still have to like, you know, like I mentioned, keep up with your deadlines and your responsibilities, and it's a separate thing. But the internal stuff, really think about like, what is the consequence of this? Is it really that bad? It's okay if I leave that for tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely prioritizing yourself and prioritizing your rest when you do get to that state. Which kind of brings me to a question I'm curious about. Like, how do you check in with yourself when you're like exceptionally tired or maybe like even out?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's hard to like recognize right away when you're starting to like feel burnt out or you're like already at that point where you're burnt out. Um, Something that I realized, at least for me, that is like a big indicator of like, okay, I need to take a break here, is when I start to like lose motivation or like lose sight of why I'm doing things, and every day just kind of starts to feel like a big drag. You start to feel like, oh, why am I doing this? You have to remind yourself why you wanted to do this to begin with, or um, you start to like lose, I guess, like motivation, or maybe the things that you would normally do to kind of like bring yourself out of that space and practice wellness. Maybe it doesn't sound like as interesting or exciting to you anymore. That's how you know you've reached the point where this is when you need those things the most. because I think that that's really like burnout can like creep up on you and you might not realize it. There are many times where I'm like, I think I'm fine, I'm doing fine, I'm managing, I'm doing great. And then all of a sudden it hits you like you just like slam into a wall. And I think that that's harder than like the buildup because sometimes, like I said, you don't realize until you get there. So some things that I try to do to check in with myself is one of the biggest things for me is sleep. I feel like I don't get enough sleep, and that's like such a common thing, and it's like glamorized almost, and like at least in pharmacy school and residency, right? It's like who is the most tired, but kind of like shifting away from that mindset, and like that's not cool, right? Like who is the most well rested? That's cool. So I try to be more intentional with that and find things to do that like fill me with energy versus drain me. Like we all know about doom scrolling, right? On Instagram. I try not to do that so much. So some of the goals that I had set for myself um, are like to read a book instead of like doom scrolling at night, which I have yet to do. So I'll let you know when I start doing it.
Yeah, I'll
uh,
to know.
yeah, so one day I'll get to it. But also like giving yourself grace to do those things. Like something that I actually had to like come to the realization of is that I love to watch TV. And I it sounds really silly, but I love watching like TV shows and I have like all these shows that I kept postponing to watch until like after residency. And I was like, I cannot watch any TV because if I watch one episode, I'm going to lose an hour that I could be doing something else. Um, and I would treat it like if it was like a reward. I'm like, okay, maybe if I like get through this week, then I'll watch one episode of whatever the show is. And I realized that like maybe that works for some people, but the truth is that I love watching TV. It like relaxes me for maybe an hour, 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what you're watching. It takes your mind off of like the constant to-do list that I have running in my head for a moment. So like shifting my mindset of thinking like, oh, you're being lazy, you're just sitting here watching TV to I'm just gonna take a moment for myself, like reset, recharge, and then keep going. That's something that I learned to do because sometimes we think about wellness being only like going to the gym or I don't know, like doing something productive, right? But then you're like caught in this like productivity race again. So sometimes it's okay to slow down. And I do love like maybe going to like a Pilates class or something for wellness or just going for a walk outside. I mentioned that I have my two dogs. So that's something that I love to do is just when I come home from work in the afternoon, I take them for a really long walk. We go out for like an hour around the block. One of my dogs is a little bit older, so he walks slower and I just kind of walk slower along him and it's like a nice time for us like spend together outside. So it's not like necessarily productive or whatever you want to label it, but it's just a nice moment to like kind of disconnect, shut off my brain from all the pharmacy slash work related things and just be present in the moment. And I think that just being realistic with yourself about what things you enjoy and what things bring you maybe comfort is the right word, like peace or comfort in that moment. It's okay to do that. And it's okay to like give yourself permission to do those things, even if it is just like watching a TV show for an hour. You don't have to feel like you're lazy because you're watching TV. It's totally fine to like decompress.
Yeah, I love that a lot. Something that my therapist has been kind of harping me on too is like how to anticipate out before it actually happens. And like a lot of the that you mentioned that like I also used to um so tell myself like can't be doing this, not productive. It's like this is for you. This is for you to stay in the game like long term, play like longevity. It's like these are your interests. This is what brings you comfort, like you said. So 100%. I think if I were to give an advice to everyone going into residency or like something where your schedule might might be very filled and might be like a lot to keep up with, have like one non-negotiable thing that like protect just for yourself. And I think for you, like that might be like watching TV. For someone else, that could be walking their dog. For someone else, it could be calling their significant other or their mom for just like 15 minutes a day even. I think having something like that can really stay grounded, can help you actually like even teen around too.
Yeah, definitely.
Very sad. Um, that being said, I think we've talked a lot about a lot of great things. If there was one thing that you could recommend for future residents, or even like one thing that you would tell yourself, pre-residency self, like what would that be? And I think we can kind of like end the episode off on oh,
Hmm. That's so hard because there are so many things I want to say to 6 month ago me.
I'll
I think the
anything you want to say, anything you want to share.
I think that the first thing that comes to my mind though is, and this sounds so cliche, but it's really true, and this is really something that I constantly have to tell myself and remind myself of is you got this far. And it's true. We've all worked so hard throughout like undergrad to get into pharmacy school, then pharmacy school to get into a residency or whatever your next step is. And sometimes it feels like you always have to be worried about the next thing, right? You're like working towards the next thing. And it can feel exhausting sometimes, but that's also life and that's part of like moving forward and growing. But it's also really important to remind yourself you've gotten this far. Um, and sometimes this is like a random thing that one of my professors said to me in pharmacy school. And like I thought in the moment that it was so weird, like such a weird metaphor or analogy or whatever, but I think about it all the time actually, so it stuck with me. He's like, whenever you're mowing the lawn, I don't mow the lawn. I don't know who mows the lawn anymore. But anyway, he was like, whenever you're like mowing the lawn or like cutting grass, you just like, you're looking ahead of like all this grass that you still have left to cut. And it's hot outside and you're tired and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to finish this. But then you like turn back and then you see how much of the lawn you've actually already cut. And in the moment, I thought it was silly because I've never cut grass in my life. But I always think about that because it's so true. When we are like looking ahead to like all the things that we have to do and all these responsibilities and all these accomplishments, like I remember day one of residency, right? We have like longitudinal projects and like MUEs and monographs that you know that they're coming and you know you're going to have to complete them, but it still feels so like overwhelming even though you have a whole year to do it. It's really important to take a moment and stop, look back, and really look at like everything that you've done so far, everything you've accomplished, and just know that it might not get done in the most ideal, productive, efficient way possible, but it will get done. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. I think that we get really wrapped up in the productivity race, like I said, and like comparing to other people's experiences and how they do things. There's no right way to go about things. I think you have to find what's right for you and what works for you and be okay with that. And like be true to yourself in that sense and be very honest with yourself and be very realistic about what things give you energy, what things drain your energy, what things you want to participate in. Um, what type of routine do you want to set up for yourself? And then once you figure out what actually works for you, then defend that and don't compare your style to anybody else's. Do what works for you and just know that, again, you've gotten to this point. You will continue working towards whatever your goal is moving forward at whatever pace that is, whatever style that is. Whatever works for you will work for you and you will get to where you want to be. And that's something that I would remind myself of. I tell myself that now, and I think I would tell myself 6 months ago me when I was starting residency.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was very inspiring. And I think for me too, that was a good reminder for myself. So I really appreciate that. I think at the end of the day, again, to listeners, like you don't need to thrive every single week. Surviving is still growth, even though it might not feel like it in the moment. And as healthcare workers ourselves, like self-care is part of being a good clinician. We hear this all the time. I think we kind of take it for granted, but how can we take care of our patients and others around us if we aren't taking care of ourselves too? So with that, I want to give a huge thanks to Sophia. Thank you for agreeing to be a guest on this episode and just diving into these topics and being so like open and vulnerable about these things. But I think it's so important, and I think that a lot of people can take really good tips and reminders away for themselves as well. And to listeners, thank you again for following along another episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, a like, subscribe to the podcast, and I look forward to the next episodes with y'all. Okay, thank you. Have a
Thank you so much for having me.